Welcome to the third Thursday lunch lecture. This is Hilary, who is going to talk about the Dorset Hollow dams and the removal and how it affects fish passage. You gotta read. So enjoy, and then as you guys all know, we have cookies and beverages afterwards.
Great.
Well,
Thank you.
Good to meet you all, and let me know if you can't hear me. Sometimes I'm hard to understand, I've been told. So Hilary Solomon, I'm the director of the Poultney Mettowee Natural Resources Conservation District, which has actually an office for the first time in 80 years up in Poultney. So come visit us anytime. We're right on Main Street, and we love showing people our new office. So we've been around for a long time. The conservation districts came out of the Dust Bowl, and the idea was that we would be a resource for landowners, and we would bring programs that were available at the national level, very tied to the Farm Bill, to local landowners and help them with implementing, soil health projects or water quality projects on their properties. So these are our main program areas. We work with farmers on water quality projects. We do sort of general outreach and education, and local schools are out in communities. We work in the headwaters, so on forestry projects in the headwaters, because that's where our clean water starts. We work with towns on stormwater projects, which was something we're really focused on. Right now there's quite a bit of funding to work with towns to try and capture and infiltrate stormwater before it goes untreated to the rivers, which is how most of it does go to the rivers right now. And then we do a lot of watershed-wide projects, generally assessments, and that is the type of, we did one of these assessments and identified these barriers to fish passage, which are also flood resilience issues as well, these dams and undersized culverts. So I'll go into sort of the process as to how we identified these up on the Mettowee River, and then how we rectified it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the overall, climate, I'm going to say, of the work that we're doing right now. And then I'll talk a little bit about, I'm kind of going from statewide and then drilling down to each project. So these are pictures from within the Lake Champlain watershed. Those are both Lake Champlain pictures, and then that was up on the Missisquoi River where the floodwaters actually flooded into a cow barn. So these are floods from 2019, but as we know, flooding is becoming more and more common in recent years, with 2 sets of floods already in 2023, last year. So all of this flood water carries with it sediment and nutrients, and it goes to Lake Champlain. And that picture with the green in the middle there is an algae bloom in Lake Champlain. So there's been a lot of national and Vermont, New York, Quebec attention on Lake Champlain because of these high nutrient loads that are going to the lake and these resulting algae blooms, which they can be toxic. So very bad for tourism, very bad for Vermont economy, very bad for the ecosystem of the lake. So that's kind of the environment in which the Conservation District is doing its work right now. And then our watershed is number 2, and that's where both my district lines up. So number 2, the bottom half under the 2 is the Mettowee watershed we'll be talking about today, and above the 2 is the Poultney watershed. And those are our 2 main rivers that feed into the southern part of Lake Champlain. These are just sort of phosphorus allocations that came out of a big study that was basically that US EPA asked Vermont to do, and Vermont is under regulatory order to reduce phosphorus now that's going to Lake Champlain. So we don't need to talk about this very much, but about 10% of the phosphorus going to Lake Champlain comes from this watershed. Okay, so now we're going to move down into more of this area. This originally, so back in 2013, we had a study that looked at the Mettowee watershed, and we were trying to identify the highest priority projects to focus on. And we identified this Dorset Hollow as one where there were quite a few barriers to fish passage, and we had partners in the study group who were very concerned about fish. So we had US Fish and Wildlife, and we had the US Forest Service as partners in this study. So for them, this was really a high priority. And when you look at these other sort of co-benefits, we're looking at the ecology of the stream, the ecology along the stream banks, that sort of interconnectedness for amphibians, for fish, for any wildlife that uses those corridors. And then also the habitat, if you have healthy trees and ecology along the stream, then those trees fall into the stream and they sort of stabilize that stream over time. You create this system that's much more stable than when you don't have trees or the sort of connectivity that the system's used to with its floodplains, for example. I'm getting a little into the weeds here, but I have a few pictures that'll show this really quickly. We had tons of partners. So these projects are expensive, and we had a lot of partners. And we had a lot of people groups that were really interested in helping with this project, because we were going to open up basically the whole Mettowee River for fish passage, and trout are an economic driver in the area, and they're also a highly valued species ecologically, because if the trout are healthy, then all the things that need the same habitat as trout, but we don't look at as closely, they're all healthy too. So whenever we did the outreach, we had to develop these, we had all these logos that we had to include. It was very inclusive. I don't know how many times, so Kit is a landowner who was here for the project, was very involved in this project, multiple barriers on properties she owned. I don't know how many, you get letters and they would have 8 logos on them.
Or meetings with 5 different people.
Right.
You know, they're
Right. And they're all representing one little piece of this puzzle. So Mettowee River, this is the Mettowee further downstream, and the picture on the right is sort of at flood stage near the Mettowee Community School. So you can see it's pretty flat, not a lot of features there, not a lot of places for the fish to hide, and that was part of the problem. So this part of the Mettowee in the Pollitt area, for example, the trees have been cut, it's been straightened. There's not a ton of habitat for fish, and it flows from south to north. So you end up with the waters, they can heat during the warm summer days. And here's a picture of part of the Mettowee in this area. So meanwhile, we have Forest Service land, it does show up, okay. Forest Service land here at the head of the Dorset Hollow. And ostensibly the fish could swim up and be in those nice cool waters during the summer, except that there were barriers to that passage by way of dams and undersized culverts, and they couldn't pass through these barriers. And I'm going to show you pictures of all of those. So that's just up in the Forest Service land on the headwaters. So these are just culverts, but basically all of these red dots on the map are places that fish can't make it from one part of the stream to the next part of the stream. And towns, as they replace culverts, are upsizing them. The state regulations have changed. Culverts have to be wider, as wide as the stream now. That helps make it so that they don't become barriers to fish passage. A lot of times when they're too small, the water shoots out with such force that it erodes the downstream of the culvert, and that creates a big jump, and the fish can't make it up that jump. So if they're sized properly, they shouldn't do that, and we should start seeing these red dots disappearing from the map as the towns upgrade their culverts over time when they start to fail. So these are our project areas, those dots. And it's a mix of culverts and dams. And I'm going to take you through this chronologically. So we're going to start with our first one and get to the last one at the end. So we're going to bounce around a little bit on the map. And if you have any questions about where we are, just let me know if you're curious.
Question?
Yep.
I'm sorry, but what exactly is a culvert?
Oh, well, I will show you a question. Let me start. It's about 2 slides away. So this is a wooden weir, and this is about halfway up the hollow off of Lower Hollow Road. And we don't quite know why that is there, but it creates a barrier to fish passage. They can't hop up that. We didn't want to take it out because we were worried that if we took it out, the ground above it, all that sediment would move downstream, and it might expose the bottom, those footers on those bridge abutments. And we love to allow fish to go upstream, but we would hate it if we ruined a town bridge. So with this one, we did something. Yeah, we did something a little bit differently, and we built.
Excuse me, could you back up?
Yeah.
The sort of little waterfall there, is that a natural?
It's not. So it's hard to see, but there are logs. It's a wooden.
Oh, okay.
It's a wooden dam, basically.
And that was put there a long time ago?
Long time ago, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's called a weir?
Yeah, so we were calling it a weir, but it
Okay.
is essentially a dam.
Okay.
In fact, it's probably more of a dam than a weir. Weirs are, anyhow. So we built these steps so the fish could hop up the steps. And working with state and federal partners, and they tend to like things to be in a certain way, and they would prefer to remove these obstacles from the stream, because in a big flood, maybe the steps would move and the fish still couldn't get upstream. But in this case, because of the bridge, it seemed that this was the best solution for the fish. So they have steps, they hop up, and then hopefully can get over that.
What's the definition of weir?
So the definition of weir, usually they're used in studies, which is funny that we've been calling this a weir for so many years now, but not the other ones. We call them dams. But usually it allows water across at a specific point, like usually they're lower in the middle, and then you can measure the flow coming through a river if you wanted to.
Okay, thanks.
So I don't know, we just always called it a weir, but it's a little wooden dam. Okay, so here's a culvert. So culverts are these pipes that go under roads, so they allow a road to go across a stream. And it basically was the most inexpensive, efficient way to get that stream under that road was to just put it in a little round pipe. And we would put them in smallish pipes because it was less expensive. So this is up on Tower Road, if you've been up to the end of Tower Road. And so because this culvert was undersized, it would have been put flush with the ground, but because it was undersized, there was lots of erosion at the downstream end, and so it created this big scour pool. And now there's such a big drop there that the fish can't jump up, or the frogs or the salamanders, can't jump up and get through. And we also have, so this is all sediment so as the water comes down the hill and it has to squeeze into this narrow space, that slows the water down. As it slows down, it loses velocity and the larger stones drop out, like during high water or flood. So this is actually a pile of cobbles that's was upstream of that culvert. So during floods, that can be dangerous, and culverts can wash out because of this happening. So there were two issues. There's two issues with these culverts. They can be dangerous during floods, and then also all the habitat issues. So we replaced that with a big, sturdy bridge that hopefully survives the floods and also is much wider and allows for all the turtles and salamanders and everybody to cross. So that was our first project. That was back in...
underneath the bridge there? Or is
Just-
that in front of the bridge? What's that?
Should just be, it's just rocks in the river. Yeah, the river comes down
No, just immediately underneath the bridge.
right here,
No, higher up.
up here.
No, below the bridge, but
You're just seeing through the other side.
Yeah,
Oh, is
yes,
that it?
right. So it comes,
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
actually two tributaries. So there's one coming here, and that's coming in, and this one going down.
I guess I better
Sorry.
shut up.
Well, okay. So our next project was also a culvert. This was in 2018. This is Pastures Lane. This one also has a really big jump for fish, and also quite a bit of fill was brought in to create that road crossing. That's another barrier for both floodwaters and also for fish and frogs that are coming up the side of the creek, and then suddenly there's a big wall of sediment. So we replaced this with a nice big bridge too. And I want to go into the sort of historic pieces at these sites because this is the Historic Society. And this one we did a historic review for all of these sites. The culverts, there was less of a review, I guess, because we were working like in the town road right away and in the town road, and so a lot of disturbance would have already happened in those areas in terms of trying to find artifacts or having it be something that would be something we would want to preserve. This site did have a stone wall that was over 50 years old, and so everybody worked very carefully to make sure that we never drove across it with a tractor or cut a tree down on it. And that stone wall was right on the uphill side, or upstream side of that bridge. Okay, so now we're going to get into the more history piece of this. Our next set of dams were the Reynolds dams. So I don't know if you know the property, but you go up Dorset Hollow Road and the Mettowee River, you cross the Mettowee River just as Kirby Hollow Road comes in, and Dorset Hollow Road swings to the right before it splits into upper and lower hollows. So it was right that property on the left, right across the river on the left, the Reynolds house. And apparently this, back in 1868, was part of a cheese making factory, or the person who lived there at least patented a cheese making vat. So there was the cheese making, plus there was the pottery. The Fenton pottery was there, I guess, originally before it moved. So that was happening in this area. Some industry back in the 1800s. And then talking about how challenging it was to get the milk to market or to the cheese factory in time to make cheese and get it to the train, which I think it sounds like the train came at 7 in the morning. So the farmers would get up at 2 to start the process of getting everything to the train station in terms of this cheese making. The other piece of history that's involved in this site is have you guys heard of the Quabbin Reservoir Project? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Reynolds property now has 3 of those Quabbin homes on it. So this is the Massachusetts reservoir that flooded multiple towns, and it sounds like this. So do you know Charles Waite? Then that's probably somebody that you've heard of because of his history of this. Yeah. Okay, so he was like a horse taxi. It sounds like, and when people were riding in his horse taxi, he would hear them talking, and he really loved. The tourists loved the architecture of the area with the small pane windows and dormers and the colonial architecture. And then once the automobile came into play, he lost, there was no need for horse taxis. So he started building, it sounds like. And he had a lot in town and brought the first of the Quabbin homes to his lot in town, and then it sounds like brought them for other people, and I think there are 14 in town now. So this is that Reynolds property with 2 put together to make the main house, and then the other one, it says in this article, it says it's a 5-car garage, so we can imagine how the size of cars at the time when that's a 5-car garage. And then it sounds like the Armstrongs had the property for quite a while and probably built those 2 dams, and that they were mostly for recreation. And I have pictures of the concrete when it was pulled out, but it's absolutely full of rebar. So much different sort of pouring practices than we use now. And I guess the price of rebar has changed, the amount of rebar that's actually in concrete these days. But they added stone walls, a picnic area. It was probably, it is still a beautiful place to recreate. So those features were added, it sounds like in the 40s and up through the 60s. And we were really looking to make sure there wasn't a really significant historical reason for those dams to be there, because the Vermont Historical Preservation would have been interested in trying to make those, either some piece of them publicly accessible, or documenting those as we took them. We did document them as we took them out, but it turned out that recreation isn't the most historically significant thing. So here are some of those pieces that were on the property. I don't know if you can see it very well, but this is a little table that's for prepping food, and it goes, there's the table and the fire pit, there's the fire pit. So there's this kind of picnic area up on a little bit of a bluff overlooking the river, and then just extensive and beautiful stone walls on the property. So this is all getting closer to this is higher up on the property, but the stone pool up on the top is very close to the river. Like we were all hanging out by that pool and
Is
stuff.
it fed by the river?
It's fed by this stream right here. So this stream comes down, that's the pump area there. And then it's pumped into that pool,
Yeah.
and then from the pool there's an overflow that goes right underneath where one of the dams was.
Okay.
And there's a little pump house. I don't know if I have a picture of it, but a little pump house sort of behind that stone pool. And then these are the dams. So we actually didn't know the upper dam was there at first because it had completely sedimented in. And the abutment, that grassy area on the top picture is the abutment. So the one all the way to the left was the abutment. So it was completely covered over with the lawn. And then you can see the dam here. You can barely see it. It just is a little straight line with sediment on both sides. But the bottom one was much more pronounced. That was the fish passage issue right there. Beautiful big fishing hole here that is now much reduced, and your speaker, who will talk about fly fishing, may complain about that. And we went back and forth with the State Historical Preservation Office. They wanted to keep a piece of each of these abutments. So there were these big square abutments, and then the dam was a little bit lower and a little bit narrower. But it was hard because, as you can see, water's already eroded behind them. So we just would have had this piece of concrete that water was still continuing to erode behind. And the scientists scientists were worried that it would really just cause more erosion and eventually that would come out, and that it was better, like the state permitting engineer, you know, felt that it was better to just remove it. We left this abutment up here that's under the grass, so that is still in place. And when we uncovered the dams, they had these circular holes in them that nobody was quite sure what they were for, whether they were to, so this sediment would have not been there. It's sedimented in over time through floods. So that would have all been exposed to 4 feet deep or so. So we didn't know if that was for water to go through or some kind of flow or lights, or we weren't quite sure.
When you saw them, were they open? Could they?
They were, so they were open, except that they had sediment completely filled in, in front and behind. Well, in front and behind the top one, and then the bottom one.
So water could not flow through them?
Well, it could trickle through the sediment, but yeah. But they would have been exposed, right? They would have been at the top of the dam when they were swimming, when it was a swimming hole. So they built it to create a swimming hole. And we think they might have built the top one to hold the sediment back, because anytime you have a dam, as Kit knows, you know, it fills up behind the dam because the water pools there, so it slows down. Just like with the culvert that was too small, the water slows down, and so sediment drops out. So they may have built the top one to hold the sediment back, and they could have cleaned that out and then kept their swimming hole. But over time, it all filled in. So we took it all out, and you can see. I don't know how well you can see it on this screen, but that's a chunk of concrete, and all those wires sticking out, and that's all the rebar. So there was just so much more rebar in that concrete than you would ever see in, you know, concrete these days. So that helped sort of date it also, at least as being pre-1970s. It's a little harder to go. We all thought, we were thinking 1920s, but the historian came back and said 1945-ish was what they thought. And then we finished up, put everything back. This abutment is still here under the grass. We added, it's hard to see, but we added a lot of woody debris downstream to help sort of stabilize it. And that actually all filled in pretty well. There have been, of course, numerous floods since this was done in 2022. So in the floods in 2023, a lot of that filled in, and it just helps keep the stream the same height because those dams were holding the stream at that height. So now we tried to sort of encourage that woody debris to have that same function. And we also have stones buried underneath the bed of the creek. So if there is any downcutting of the stream, those large stones will hold it in place once it gets to a certain level.
Does someone come back and check on?
Yeah, we come back and check on it. So Trout Unlimited is one of our as a partner who was really, really involved in this. They did some of the engineering, and they did a lot of this, the woody, in the next KIDS project, I'll show you some of the woody debris additions that they did. And they come back and fly drones over it and measure it with survey equipment every year, at least until we decide it's stable and that it's not going to go anywhere. All right, so the next project is KIDS. Thank you for joining us today. So this, and I'll go through the history, but just jump in anytime you want to add anything or something looks. Yeah, so this is a big dam, and it's, I don't know how wide, but you know, over 100, like 200 feet wide. It's very, very wide dam, and I'll get you guys an aerial photo in a second. Here's the full kind of main dam, which is still in place. The family really did want to preserve this, and it also historically is an interesting, it's an interesting dam. So I don't know that the state would have actually let us remove this part of the dam. This is an old aerial. Can you see this? I feel like it's very challenging. Okay.
I can't.
It's a little hard even on the computer because this is a very old picture. It's from 1942. But I think the thing to notice is that this shadow right here, that's the pond behind the dam. And the dam goes all the way across. And that's Tower Road there. So it was a big structure. It was part of the Barrows farm up at the end of the hollow. And then there's just some history about that sort of early property ownership, but it sounds like it was in the Barrows family for quite a while, and they had great names, Experienced Barrows, who then passed the property to Philetus Barrows, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. And then eventually it was bought by somebody, maybe like a city person, who came came up, Reverend Samuel Mills Warren, who came up in the late 1800s, and it sounds like he made his money selling composition or gravel roofing, so I think probably asbestos, or sorry, not asbestos, but the roofing, what am I trying to say, asphalt shingle, not asbestos, asphalt. Asphalt shingle is what it sounded like to me when it's the gravel roofing. So it sounds like he took good care of the property and, you know, lots of buildings and barns, and there are lots of buildings and barns up there still. And then the power, sort of the dam was built, and the idea was there's no power in the hollow, so they wanted power back up there. And so the dam was built to generate power in the early 1920s. This is Dr. Warren Dibble Howe. Is that a relation of yours that is that a name?
No, Warren Howe was the one that, built
Who
it.
built it, okay.
Was it called the Paula River back then?
I think it's always been called the Mettowee River.
It says on the Paula River.
Oh, sorry, I did not. That was the historian that wrote that piece, but oops, now okay, it's okay. Yeah, so I don't know then, I guess, because the historian actually wrote that. So I didn't know it had ever not been called the Mettowee River.
Yeah,
but now I'm going to have to
I didn't know that either. We need to find that out.
So this was the University of Vermont that did this historical research. But Brian Knight, who's a Dorset resident, did the research for Reynolds, so he might know the answer to that. So there's some more pictures of the powerhouse. And it's beautiful, and you've probably all seen it, because you can see it from the road, but it's fantastic. And there was definitely some talk about trying to see if we could generate power. I think Kit was sort of interested to see if we could if it was possible to generate power again, but the permitting, of course, is very complicated for that these days. And then the other thing, so then in the 70s, and it's funny because one of your pins on the map in the other room is landslides. And so I think those landslides ended up filling in quite a bit of the pond behind the dam. So over time, first electricity was brought up into the valley, and so that sort of rendered the electric making a little less important. And then also the back of the pond filled in the 1970s with these landslides, these major landslides that happened up in the hollow. So the pond filled in over time. So then we kind of talked about the property sold again. The ski area was going to be built back there. It sounds like Kit and her family, or Kit's family, sort of helped in that resistance to the ski area, and then and the Dorset Hollow Corporation then owned quite a bit of the land along the rivers because they wanted to do like ecological passageways, sort of green belts along the river. So that was how Kit ended up so involved in our projects, because of those really, really forward-thinking greenways along the rivers back up in the hollow. That's really preserved that Mettowee River back there. And then as part of our research, we also try to do some, we contact the local tribes, which is the Stockbridge Muncie for this area, and they have a tribal office. And they look at all of our engineering plans, and they try to make sure that we're not working in an area that could have like pre-contact archaeology or have been part of some type of a ceremonial land. And the response that they sent back was just that through all of the building and the dam, and then also those big floods in 1927 that apparently really scoured this area out badly, that they didn't feel that we could go ahead with our project. They did have, and here's the map that they made. They did have, so we were working on this, we ended up working on the right-hand side of that blue dot. And they asked us to if we could just enter the project area from just one direction and not go across those areas that might be sensitive on the other side of the stream to avoid that. So we did. We just had one sort of point where we entered and did all our work from. And it wasn't our original plan, but it ended up working out really well. So this is another piece that had been developing over the years at this site. So this dam goes all the way across, like where the arrows end, all the way across this picture. And the river was coming down over here, and then making a 90-degree corner, and then making another 90 to go across the dam. So that's the main dam that you saw a picture of over there. But what started to happen over time, and it was really getting worse and worse and worse, or more and more extreme as we were working, so through 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, when the stream was starting to go this way. So this was an old overflow chute, and the stream was starting to decide that it wanted to go that way. And it was starting to put sediment here, so it was harder and harder to access the main dam. And here is that. So this is the spillway wall after we'd started digging a little bit behind it. So there's the main dam over here. The stream would come, make a 90-degree, and go over the dam, except it was starting to come this way. And what was happening to that spillway is that it was starting to get really, really decomposed. You know, it was 100 years old, and it was starting to collapse, basically. So what we ended up doing, since we didn't want to take out the main dam, was we removed the spillway side, which was smaller. The concrete wasn't as thick. It was an easier place to work, and so basically put the stream into its kind of alternate flood-only channel, and bypass the main channel for 100 feet. So here we are, kind of like height of the project. That's where the bypass channel was. At the tree right here, the dam picks up again and keeps going. And then here's the type of woody debris that we were adding. So this is right below where the dam was removed. Those are Aaron's with Trout Unlimited's feet. And so we were adding sort of strategically adding wood, and then using big like wooden stakes to try and secure it into the stream bed. And this all did fill up, like this is all the stream height now. The stream bottom height is the top of that wood now. It all did silt in, just like those Reynolds dams silted in. This silted in too. And we did the same thing on the upstream side because we don't want any erosion to keep going upstream, so laid some wood across the upstream side. And that is the final, that's how it looked when we were finished. So there's the old dam right behind that pine tree, and the stream just keeps going straight instead of turning there. And we hope the fish are happy. We did have a little down cutting here, so it did go down a little bit in the landscape, and that's what we're keeping an eye on to make sure it doesn't keep doing that. And then I know I have a lot of slides, but we're at our last project. So this is Sugar House Lane. Has anybody crossed the Sugar House Lane Bridge? So you can go check out this project also. So this one, the State Historic Preservation thought that this was built on an old dam, that the bridge was put on an old dam. And when we dug up the abutments and the concrete in the stream, we found the same thing we'd seen in the Reynolds Dam. We had all of this rebar in the concrete, and they had left, that's the wooden form for pouring the concrete, and those had been left in place also at the Reynolds Dam, where it would have been under sediment. So very similar construction method, maybe the same contractor, same era. So probably 1940s dam with the newer bridge sitting on top of it. And that one, that's what it looks like afterward. We removed some of the fill that had been brought in to try and open up this floodplain. So again, during flooding, the water has more places to go. And then planted it back up. We planted everything back up with native plants when we were done. And hopefully it will all continue well into the future. These are big, strong structures. And it was an expensive project. There were a lot of people involved. 12 organizations provided technical support, outreach, permitting. 7 provided funding. 7 engineers worked on the plans over the years, and 18 landowners were abutters or directly crossed these bridges and culverts to get to their homes. So there were about 40 people total involved in these projects altogether. So we're kind of happy it's done now. It's a lot of work, but really happy also that this is all opened back up, and changes we made over time have been sort of put back.
Are you going to do any inventory of like fish population, or is there a way of tracking that?
Yeah, so we do, and both the state does, State Fish and Wildlife, and Trout Unlimited will, and the Forest Service does. So when we started all this, we had big data sets of fish data, and so one of the concerns is that brook trout is really our native trout species, and brook trout live at higher elevations than the brown and rainbows, which were brought in from Europe. And so part of the reason that these groups that are really focused on fish wanted to do this project is now these brook trout, which are native, could get up into their headwater areas. So right now their populations have been maybe a little bit isolated, should have free access. And we're hoping that because the browns and rainbows don't go up past about 1,300 feet in elevation, that they won't go up into the forest, the Forest Service headwaters. They'll sort of stay down in the deeper waters that they like.
So other than maybe maintenance work, if the project's complete for the hollow area?
Yeah, they are. And yeah, Sugar House is the one we'll have to keep an eye on for a little while because the state really did want to open that floodplain back up again, but I don't think the floods accessed that floodplain. And the homeowners didn't think it was, the other side was accessed either in the past, so we'll see. It's gonna be a little bit of a, do we leave it how it was or try to really work to get waters up onto those benches so that, we can slow the flood water down before it comes into the village, or do what we can upstream of the village. So we're keeping an eye specifically on whether the water gets into the floodplain at high water stages. So we talk about climate change, and we talk about the changes in rainfall and the changes in our stream flow. These are the types of projects that we're trying to implement that hopefully help a little bit to keep water, to slow it down as it comes down from the headwaters and heads for villages. So it's a little bit like a drop in the bucket, but
Enough drops fills the bucket, though.
all right. So, anybody wants any trees planted along their river or wants to participate in our tree sale? We do have a tree sale every spring, and we do lots of tree planting. So we usually do that for free. Usually the tree planting is free, depending on where you're located. But so we do
It has
offer
to be
some
right
services.
beside the river,
By the river, yes. Trees tend to be free if they're by the river.
by the stream or not?
Yeah, by
The stream? Oh.
Do you have anything to add, or I don't know if we skimmed past? There's so much history at your property, and I skimmed past it a little bit, but
Yeah, it was a balancing act between what maintenance was just historically. I mean, the dam is beautiful. It's like a 12-foot drop, so we've always been there for 60 years, and that's an important part of the experience is hearing the water go over the dam, and now we don't have water going over the dam, so it was a bit of a family tussle to get the fish one out.
So the dam is still there, though?
The dam's there, and there's actually a stream on the property upstream, a spring on the property upstream of us that has water that goes. So there is some water going over the dam.
it's more of a trickle.
A trickle, yeah. And originally we were hoping that that the overflow on about I think the original plan was like a 5-year flood, that the water could channel, and at that point some water would come over the dam. But in the storms we've had since it was installed, doesn't do it.
That was one of the downsides of having like 7 different engineers work on these projects, is that some information may not have always been accurately passed back and forth, so that it did go in a little lower than I would have liked to have seen that stream bottom. But a lot of it has to do with state and federal regulations or guidelines about how they do the work, and so it was hard when you have people that are permitters or dealing with their code book, and we're trying to sort of facilitate a good outcome for a landowner, so trying to balance that out. I would have liked to have seen it a little higher. It's always, but it's safe. It's just
It's beautiful.
lower.
It is beautiful. Just,
Yeah.
Just
on the
over
other
the
side.
dam.
But yeah, most of these are visible. If you want to tour around, you can go drive over the new bridge at Sugar House and at Pastures Lane.
When do you decide that the remodeling of the stream was a success?
I feel like
As far as fish flows and flooding?
I feel like 2 things that we look for over time. So one, like during Tropical Storm Irene, we went back to all our projects and checked them, and if they made it through that, we felt like, okay, that was a success. Because if there's something bigger than Irene, it's just hard to engineer for those giant events, so that we're engineering for the big events. And then the other piece is that over time, if we have the stream just moving and doing its thing, and we end up with what we put in to stabilize the stream, creating another problem for fish, that would be a failure too. So it's balancing out, trying to keep the stream in place, and also not creating some artificial new barrier for fish.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long does it take to figure that out, or is it a continuous evaluation?
Well, I would say it used to take a little bit longer because we had more time between these flood events, but now we're just getting hit, and that's part of what happened to Kits. Nothing had had a chance to establish itself, so nothing had compacted, or, you know, it was all loose and fresh, and then we just got hit with multiple floods. So that makes it more challenging. If we can get plants to establish and these cobbles to like interlock, you know, just over time, that provides some stability to these sites too. So it's just the engineering then. It's like we're directly challenging the engineering with floods that happen within a year or two after these projects are installed. Great questions.
Where do you go next?
Well, so we are looking at Kirby Hollow. There are culverts, 3 or 4 culverts on Kirby Hollow that are also causing the fish passage problem, and the stream is much smaller than the Mettowee, so it should be easier, less expensive fixes. They're on private property, most of them, so we'd be seeing if the property owner would be interested in working with us and maybe going through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is Farm Bill funding, which puts a lot more responsibility on that property owner then to fill out the paperwork and write the grants, which normally we do that work. So we had kind of a mix of public-private, and we had already gotten a big chunk of funds from the Forest Service to do that, that was sort of the linchpin from which all this work happened here in the Mettowee. We don't have that starting out with the Kirby Hollow, so we just, Trout Unlimited is doing an assessment over the next year to kind of figure out if there's enough need that we could justify putting these grants in, asking for the funding.
And then setups like the little park in Peace Street where the dam has been built by hand and
Right.
people create little swimming areas. Are those problematic for what you're trying to do?
So maybe a little bit, but the way the state regulates that, and they look at it that like if you can lift it by hand, probably a storm could take it out too. Although we have seen some of those embed a little bit, like they get filled in with sediment and then they are a little bit stronger. But right now that's not regulated. It would be great if there were like low points, or at the end of the swimming season, somebody took out a couple rocks so the fish can come through. That would be great.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Fascinating.
Upstairs, we have a bunch of Charlie Wade houses.
Oh, you have them all, okay. Yeah, he sounded like a character. I mean, I love that he reinvented himself after his first career sort of took a downturn.
Turn this off. Let's see.
Well, pretty well.
I don't know.